Hello again. This is Pat, and I'm going to tell you a story about my daddy. He was born in 1895 in a very large family. Back in those days, the people didn't have all these TVs and electronic stuff to play with, so they just had each other, and that created some very large families. And I think there was 8 kids, and there wasn't much industry. There wasn't any industry back then. This is even before the Depression. But they'd do anything to make some money that was legal, and what they ended up doing was the railroad was coming in strong, and they needed railroad ties. So they would go out and cut down the oak trees, score them with a regular axe, and then take a big broad axe and chop them out and make them square. And I'm telling you, a railroad tie out of green oak is heavy. They'd have to put it on their shoulder and tote it over to the wagon and load the wagon and take it to wherever they was going to sell it. And Daddy told me that there was a winter there where they'd had a real rough summer and everything, and they didn't really have shoes, and they wrapped their feet up with rags and go stand on a piece of tin that was on the fire, and they heat their feet up real good, and they'd take turns. There's only 2 boys in the family and the daddy, and they'd take turns to stand over and get warmed up and then jumping on that log and hewing it out and making railroad ties. So he had it pretty rough. And this was in Missouri. And then he went to the Army, and he became a mule skinner in World War I. And so he learned quite a bit about animals and how to use a black snake whip, and he got quite an education in the Army. He got out of the Army and he decided he wanted to be a cowboy. So he started working with horses out in Wyoming and Colorado and all out in through there. He finally married my mother, but it was much later in life. And he was kind of a gypsy. He didn't want to stay no place very long. So they got married, and they added my sister. She was born there in Missouri. And so then he decided he wanted to go to California. So they started, and they got as far as Kansas, and then I was born. So that slowed him down some, and then after a while, and my grandma and grandpa on my mama's side, they was traveling with him. So they worked in the cotton fields or whatever. I don't know what they did in Kansas, but they went to Arizona, and they had a tent they lived in for a while, and they picked cotton or whatever to make some money, and then they went on and they ended up in California. So Daddy ended up working on a ranch, and he was sitting on a buck rake, which is just a seat sitting over a big old set of tongs, and I don't know if they pulled it with a tractor or horses, but the seat broke. When it broke, he fell down on that buck rake, and it busted his hips. And he laid in the hospital with weights on his feet for a while. And he got out of there, and then he moved to another part of California, moved a little further north. And it was south of San Francisco and San Jose. And it was a Highway 101 was a main drag up California, north and south. And he bought a place, and the street we lived on was just parallel to 101, and there's a big open field between there and 101, plus the railroad track run down there along the highway. And there's a big old corral there that had been used for cows, I reckon, and they probably shifted them out on the train years ago, and it was pretty well dilapidated. But that was a place to play, and I was probably 10 years old, 8 or 10, something like that. And one day we got to digging around there, and we found a trap door in the ground, and we dug it up and got it opened and made us a ladder and got down in there, and by doggies, it was a big old square room, but there wasn't nothing in it, just dry as it could be. So that night I told my daddy what we found. He said, "Son, you're very fortunate. You just found a septic tank for that corral over there." So then, next few days later, we was over there playing, and there's a feller laid up and made camp out there by that corral. And we got to talking to him, and he was really nice, but he's crippled up and couldn't walk. So I told Daddy about that. So he went and made him a set of crutches. He took it over and gave us that fella. And the next day or so, he went over and he was gone. So he left some stuff there in camp, so we plundered around there and looked, and my buddy found a $50 gold piece. I mean, that was worth a fortune in them days. So I again told my daddy, and he went over and looked for him and drove up the highway, but the old boy probably got on a freight train and got out of town. There's a lot of bums and people back in them days, it's the way they traveled, didn't have no money. They'd steal what they could, and what they couldn't, they'd do something. But anyway, never heard no more from him. That was just a dead end. And after that, Daddy moved to Northern California. They opened up a big batch of timber up there, and they was cutting and milling that. So it was, you know, a big thing going. So Daddy moved up there, and he went to work for a big sawmill there. And them were big trees up there in Northern California. And he went to work for them as a night watchman. So I'd go down there with him at night, and it was pretty cool. I played with the bats and the whippoorwills and shoot rocks up in the air, and they'd try to fall it. Once in a while, I'd knock one out. The rock would be coming down, and they'd be going up. So, but Daddy, we lived in a tent. He got a big military-type tent, and we lived in that for a while. And while he was living in it, he built a 2-story house right there beside him. And when he got that built, he left. He said, we're going to go back to Missouri. So we went back to Missouri, and he bought a farm. And a lot of things happened on that farm, and I'm going to sit down and tell you all about some of that stuff that happened on the farm.